The idea of a single family becoming richer than entire nations seems impossible today, but there was a moment in history when one dynasty achieved exactly that. Long before billionaires existed, long before central banks shaped monetary policy, there was a German merchant family whose influence extended from the mines of Central Europe to the palaces of emperors. Their loans financed wars, their business networks connected continents, their copper-powered armies, and their silver-funded kings. This is the unbelievable yet fully documented story of the Fuggers, a family from the city of Augsburg who quietly built an economic empire so enormous that even the most powerful monarchs depended on them for survival. The Fugger dynasty didn't become rich through luck or inheritance. They engineered their rise through innovation, ruthless discipline, and an understanding of global trade centuries ahead of their time. Their story shows how money, when concentrated in the hands of a single family, can reshape nations. The Fugger story begins in the 14th century with Hans Fugger, a weaver who moved to Augsburg to escape political turmoil. At that time, a weaver was just another craftsman, but Hans had one advantage. He understood textiles, and textiles were becoming central to European trade. By building relationships with merchants and investors, he laid the foundation for a family business that his descendants would transform into something completely different. When his grandson Jakob Fugger was born in 1459, the world was in the early stages of a massive transformation. Trade routes were expanding, mining technology was improving, and European rulers needed unprecedented amounts of money to fund wars, dynastic marriages, and territorial expansion. Jakob Fugger realized that whoever controlled credit could control power, and so he set out not just to be a merchant, but to reinvent what banking meant. Jakob Fugger's rise was fueled by one of the most important decisions in European history: financing the Habsburg dynasty. The Habsburgs were ambitious and wanted the imperial crown of the Holy Roman Empire, which required enormous bribes to the 7 princes who voted for the emperor. No king, duke, or prince had that much cash available. Jakob Fugger did. He arranged loans so massive and so strategically timed that Emperor Maximilian I, and later his grandson, Charles V, became completely dependent on him. In return, the Fuggers received something even more valuable than interest: exclusive mining contracts for silver, copper, and other resources across Central Europe. These mines produced a significant percentage of Europe's precious metals at the time, allowing the Fugger family to influence currency production, trade flows, and even the early global economy. By the early 1500s, Jakob Fugger controlled mining operations from Tyrol to Hungary and trade routes stretching across the continent. His copper became essential to European minting. His silver fueled the spending of kings. His financial networks stretched from Venice to Lisbon, from Antwerp to Rome. At one point, historians estimate that the Fugger family's assets exceeded the annual revenues of major European kingdoms like France and Spain. This wasn't a metaphor. In documented accounts, rulers openly acknowledged their dependence. When the Habsburgs needed to fund wars in Italy, they went to Fugger. When the Vatican required money to build St. Peter's Basilica, they went to Fugger. When merchants in Antwerp needed credit to expand global trade, Fugger was the man behind the money. He had effectively become Europe's central bank long before such an institution officially existed. The Fuggers didn't rely only on mining and lending. They revolutionized business practices that would later define capitalism. They pioneered double-entry bookkeeping, enabling large-scale operations with precise financial control. They built an intelligence network of agents who reported political and economic developments across dozens of cities. They created some of the earliest forms of multinational corporations, with branches in Venice, Rome, Nuremberg, Innsbruck, and Antwerp. They even invented early versions of futures contracts and trade financing. What made their model so groundbreaking was scale. No one before them had centralized so many industries: textiles, mining, trade, banking under one coordinated operation. Jakob Fugger wasn't just managing money. He was managing an entire economic ecosystem. Of course, such extraordinary wealth came with enormous power. When political controversies erupted, the Fugger family often stood at their center. One of the most controversial episodes involved the sale of church indulgences, a practice that helped trigger the Protestant Reformation. The Vatican needed money for construction projects and relied on loans from the Fuggers. To repay these loans, the Church allowed the sale of indulgences in German territories, creating enormous public anger. Martin Luther famously criticized these practices, and although the Fuggers never intended to spark a religious revolution, their economic involvement played a role that history cannot ignore. The Fugger Empire grew by taking financial risks that other families avoided. Some succeeded beautifully, others changed the course of Europe. As Jakob Fugger grew older, he secured his family's legacy by ensuring that his nephews and successors could manage the empire. But even with its incredible wealth, the Fugger dynasty faced challenges. The discovery of massive silver reserves in the New World, controlled by the Spanish Empire, introduced new competition. Wars across Europe disrupted trade routes. Political instability increased the risk of loans not being repaid. However, the Fuggers adapted by expanding into new industries, including early state finance, colonial trade, and even real estate. One of their most famous projects was the Fuggerei in Augsburg, the world's oldest social housing complex still in use today. Jakob Fugger built it in 1521 to provide affordable housing for the city's poor. Even at the peak of his power, he understood that a dynasty needed public goodwill to survive. After Jakob Fugger's death in 1525, the family continued to operate for more than a century, though no successor matched his brilliance. They remained wealthy and influential, but slowly their dominance declined as new economic powers emerged. The Dutch trading system rose, English merchants expanded overseas, and newer banking families, including the Medici and later the Rothschilds, developed. Financial techniques that modernized the system. Nonetheless, for nearly 150 years, the Fuggers had achieved something unprecedented. They were private citizens whose wealth and influence competed directly with kings. They didn't have armies, but they could decide who received funding for wars. They didn't rule territories, but they controlled the resources beneath them. Their empire was built not by conquering land, but by conquering debt, contracts, and supply chains. What makes the Fuggers so remarkable is not just the size of their wealth, but the timing of it. They operated at the exact moment when Europe was transitioning from medieval economics to early capitalism. Monarchs were struggling to fund their ambitions. Cities were expanding. Trade networks were strengthening. Mining was becoming essential to coinage. The Fuggers understood these trends better than any family of their time. They financed Christopher Columbus's voyages indirectly through Spanish loans. They influenced elections within the Holy Roman Empire. They shaped the politics of the papacy. In many ways, they demonstrated the power of capital long before modern economists wrote about financial influence. Their story is a reminder that economic power often shapes history more deeply than political speeches or military victories. Today, the Fugger name remains known mostly to historians, yet their fingerprints are everywhere in the modern world. The systems they pioneered, international banking networks, resource monopolies, corporate management structures, and information reporting, are fundamental to the global economy. Their story is rarely told outside academic books, but it deserves far more attention. When people talk about families richer than nations, they often think of modern tech billionaires or oil dynasties. But centuries earlier, the Fuggers had already reached that unimaginable level. They didn't just accumulate wealth, they shaped the path of empires, financed global exploration, and built the foundations of modern capitalism. If you found this story fascinating and want to dive deeper into the hidden financial forces that shaped our world, make sure you like the video, subscribe to Historinomica, and turn on notifications. Every day, we uncover the powerful families, forgotten empires, and economic secrets that textbooks rarely mention. Share this video with someone who loves financial history, and stay tuned for the next chapter in the incredible story of money, power, and the people who built the modern world.